Good morning. Thank you, Millie. Thank you, Robert. That very first song, that was my dad's song. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or a song, if I can tell some traveler that she's going wrong, then my living will not be in vain. So I want to talk to you today about what is our purpose. And my title of the talk is Love Thy Neighbor. Before I start, I want to share something with you. There was a woman and a man who were married, and they were having some disagreements, and it seems like constant arguments. And finally he said to her, "You know, Linda, I finally come to the conclusion that the only reason you married me is not love, is because you know that I inherited $40 million from my grandfather." She said, "John, don't be ridiculous. I don't care who you inherited it from." So I want to talk about love, real love. Love thy neighbor. When I think about love, I think about something I'm sure all of you are familiar with. Maybe like me, my children were young when I first saw this or heard this. But I found out a lot about this man when I was doing my research. He always started out with, "It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in the beauty hood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine?" How about that? You probably remember who that was, right? Mr. Rogers. Well, I did not know, and because I have a background in aviation, that Mr. Rogers was a general aviation pilot. Did you know that? I did not know that Mr. Rogers was a Presbyterian minister. He was a television personality and an actor, and he started out his television show to prove that television was a bad thing. That was his whole purpose in the beginning. He was going to have a show to show that it was a waste of time to have people sitting in front of a crazy tube, and it turned into be one of the most magnificent shows that had 894 episodes. So he was an amazing man with a powerful vision, and we still hear that song in our heads. I know I do. And so when I think about that, I think about what was Mr. Rogers' message. His message was love thy neighbor. He always talked about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. So welcome to the Unity Temple neighborhood. So when you hear the expression from my vernacular, "I'm in the hood," in fact, if you have your cell phones out right now, you're not supposed to, but if you do and you want to just happen to Facebook somebody or send somebody a tweet, please tweet them and tell them you're in the hood at Unity Temple. Welcome to the neighborhood. What also inspired me was what happened in Charlottesville 2 weeks ago, because I realized that what happens in one part of the country or another part of the world is almost like happening here at home, isn't it? It touches us at our deepest levels. If you have any love in your heart at all, any tragedy affects you. Put a little love in your heart makes a big difference. Now, Jesus said we should love our enemies. Well, who are our enemies? Last week, Duke answered some questions, and I wasn't here. I was at Unity at the Lake speaking, and I happened to watch the video. And he talked about fear and greed. Someone asked the question, why is the world so full of hatred? And Duke said, fear and greed. And that's true. We're either afraid of something, and so we attack what we're most afraid of, not having enough, someone having more. Or we can't get enough, so we have that sense of greed. We can never be satisfied until we have it all. Elie Wiesel, the late Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, said, "The opposite of love is not fear, it's indifference." Indifference. We come here every Sunday morning and we talk about scripture or metaphysics. Sometimes we talk about various wisdom teachers from all over the world, past and present, Thich Nhat Hanh and Buddha, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, and all these great philosophers. And then we go back home to our normal lives, and we don't don't think about our neighbors. The internet has brought the neighborhoods so much closer, hasn't it? It's no longer divided by culture, ethnicity, race, religion, sexual preferences. We are all in this together. This is our neighborhood. Who is our neighbor? In his book, The World According to Mr. Rogers, he writes, "Love isn't a state of perfect caring. It's an active noun like struggle. To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way he or she is right here, right now. Love thy neighbor." The group Courageous Conversations started here several months ago, almost a year ago, because of members of this congregation wanting to know, how can we be more of a beneficial presence to our neighbors? What can we do to change the consciousness of ourselves and our neighbors? And so the members of this group have been discussing this every Sunday from about noon to 2 o'clock. We've gone to movies, we've discussed our own backgrounds and experiences, and then we decided we'd try to use the ripple effect that Mother Teresa talked about and ripple out the good by sharing some of the things that we come up with in our group that have helped us expand our own consciousness. The movie that Duke mentioned during the announcements, Forbidden, Undocumented and Queer in Rural America, is about Moses Serrano, who as a baby escaped from poverty in Mexico with his parents. And they settled in a rural town where he never felt quite welcomed. And as an adult decided to do something about it. One of the questions that was asked last Sunday was, why don't we at Unity Temple become more involved in social justice? Well, we do. We are. We have several of your neighbors sitting right next to you who are activists in the community, throughout the nation, doing what they can courageously to make a difference. That's why we, as Courageous Conversations, chose to show the movie, the film, that was only shown once in Kansas City at the Tivoli in June. And Beth Da Silva, raise your hand, Beth, who's a member of our group, brought the idea to our group, and the group decided it would be good to share. If you don't know anything about your neighbors, how can you help your neighbors? How can you love your neighbors if you don't know anything except what you have read in the newspaper or have seen on the news? Last week, on Wednesday, about 4 of us from the temple attended a program called Stand Up Kansas City. It was for Women's History Week, which, as you know, women received the right to vote August 26, 1920. So it's the anniversary of Women's History Week. And the focus is the minimum wage, raising the minimum wage in Kansas City. A doctor, medical doctor, stood up and spoke, Dr. Khan. She said that she has a housekeeper come in and help out. And one day, as she was cleaning out her refrigerator of food that was about 2 days old, she had already thrown it in the garbage when the housekeeper came to her and said, "Do you mind if I take that?" Dr. Khan said, through tears, she didn't realize that her neighbor, this woman who was helping her in her home, needed food for her family. And so that has charged her to be an activist for her neighbors. Love thy neighbor. Mr. Rogers said when he was a boy, he would watch some scary things, and his mother would say, "Don't worry, always look for the helpers. There are always helpers." You may not even know the person you're sitting next to. You may not have taken the time to look them eyeball to eyeball and find out who they are. You may have made some assumptions. When you take the time to be courageous enough to love your neighbor, you ask questions, and then you listen for the answer. Dr. Khan said that day, she had to walk away, turn her back and cry, because she realized that we take so many things for granted. There are people sitting right here in this congregation living in their cars. There are people sitting right here who come every Sunday, attend classes, that are living in shelters. We don't even have to go outside this church for our neighborhood to ask ourselves, who is my neighbor? If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can share somebody with a word or song, if I can tell somebody that she's going wrong, then my living will not be in vain. We can talk about these things, but what do we do about them? In the stories that we learn about Jesus when he was teaching the disciples about how to live their best lives, how to be their best selves, even after he's gone, the story in Matthew and in Mark recount how one of them said, of all these things you've taught us, what would you say are the most important things we need to know to live our best lives and to help create better lives for others? And Jesus said, it goes back to the laws and the prophets in Leviticus 19. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. But the second is the greatest commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, the first part of that, you know, you can glad hand your neighbors. You can say hello, wave when they pass by. Maybe you're loving your neighbor as best you know how. But the first part of that is not the most important key to what Jesus was saying. The most important key is you love yourself. Because if you love yourself, really, really, really love yourself, you cannot not love somebody else. Are you getting that? Are you hearing me? You have to love yourself first. Years ago, I got a copy of Louise Hay's meditation tape on loving yourself. And in it, she sings this little mantra, I love and accept myself exactly as I am. I love and accept myself. All is well in my world. I love and accept myself exactly as I am. If I cannot accept me exactly as I am, how can I accept you exactly as you are? You are a reflection of my own soul. So my lesson today is from that scripture, that we are all neighbors. And as neighbors, we have the ability to tear down walls, to break down barriers, to turn darkness into light, to turn hate into love. I had a demonstration of this unconditional neighborly love when Phil and I first moved into the neighborhood in Lee's Summit. We sold our house in Raytown, and we had 2 days before the new owners were to take possession. We had to stuff everything in that garage, and it's still there. 12 years have gone by. We don't know what's in those boxes. Obviously, we don't need them. 2 days after we moved in, we had vacation scheduled. And so we were off to our vacation. We hadn't met any neighbors. We hadn't done much of anything but pile everything into the house. A week later, a neighbor came over and rang the bell. She said, every day for a week, never met us, didn't know anything about us. And she said, every day for a week, we've been bringing these brownies. We sit them on the porch. We don't see any lights on, no cars moving. So I send the kids back over in the evening to pick up the brownies. We are so full of brownies. Here's a box of cookies. Talk about neighborly. That's loving thy neighbor. A couple of years ago, we forgot to cancel the newspaper. And when we got back home after a week's vacation, Those papers were stacked up so neatly, I hate to even touch them. I mean, they looked like they were like a pyramid. I didn't know who did that. And one day as I was walking to the mailbox, a neighbor who I didn't know said, I hope you didn't mind me stacking your papers up, but I didn't want anybody to think that, sometimes people see all those newspapers and they think they have freedom to come in and just take what they want. Now that's being a neighbor, unconditional love. Neither one of them had to do what they did. And the best thing I know how to do is emulate that, pass it on. Emmett Fox said something that I really love. He said, there is no difficulty that enough love will not conquer. No disease that enough love will not heal. No door that enough love will not open. It makes no difference how hopeless the outlook, how muddled the tangle, how great the mistake. A sufficient amount of love will dissolve it all. If only you could love enough, you would be the happiest and most powerful being in the world. Imagine that. How many of you don't want to be the happiest that you can be? Raise your hands. Something as simple as loving your neighbor without expecting anything in return can generate so much happiness that it could light the world. Did you notice something beautiful in your neighborhoods or wherever you went to watch the eclipse? Did you notice that all of us were looking up in these funny glasses at the same time? People who didn't even know each other were staring up, looking at the sky. A few moments of peace, brotherhood, and sisterhood, neighborliness all over, especially the Midwest. That was a true demonstration of loving thy neighbor. We put aside any differences. We realized for the first time we're all on this together. We're all from the hood. Mr. Rogers said something else. I was just fascinated because all I knew was the children's show. And reading about him really fascinated me. He said, whether we are a preschooler or a young teen, a graduating college senior or retired, we human beings all want to know that we're acceptable, that our being alive somehow makes a difference in the lives of others. Little did I know that Mr. Rogers was such a profound spirit. Except for the children. I knew he grabbed me, and I wasn't a child at the time, but watching my children watch his show. He went on to say, we need to help people discover the true meaning of love. He said love is generally confused with dependence. Those of us who have grown in true love know that we can love only in the proportion to our capacity for independence. At our deepest levels, we are all energetic, spiritual, inextricably connected beings, beings of light. And as we focus our attention on the expression of love, it will radiate out to the universe. Mother Teresa said, I cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. The Courageous Conversations initiative here at Unity Temple is about that, casting the stone across the water to create many ripples in our consciousness, in our neighborhood. Love thy neighbor. Love thy neighbor with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. That's the greatest commandment. And when you do so, you cannot help but to love yourself. Love yourself. I can't think of any better lesson, not just on a Sunday, but every day, a take-home assignment, so to speak, to practice loving yourself. And just see how that ripple carries forward. People will see you walk in the room and the lights will come on when you love yourself. So I'm going to give you a courageous experience. You see, I asked our Courageous Conversations group some time ago to join me in this experiment that I heard from a Dr. Dale Henry many years ago when he came to Kansas City to speak. It so enamored me that I still remember it. He asked the people to talk about change. So when I think about loving your neighbors, sometimes that means we have to be courageous enough to change something about ourselves. Be more open, be more loving, be more kind, be more giving. Take a risk. Get to know somebody that maybe doesn't look exactly like you or dress like you. So he asked the audience, if you were going to change your toilet, now I know this talk is going in the toilet, but if you were going to change your toilet, what would you change? And somebody in the audience said, well, I'd change the color. Great. Okay. What color? Pink. Of course. Of course, I'd make mine red. That's my favorite color. And then he'd say, okay, we changed the color. Now, what would you change? And somebody else said, well, I'd make it adjustable. Because as I usually say when the kids come in, I'm a little under tall. So I'd make it go up or down. And then he said, okay, well, make it adjustable. Okay, somebody else said, I'll make it flush itself. Well, we have that today. I'll make it self-cleaning, somebody else said. And then Dr. Henry said, okay, you're going to change the color, you're going to make it adjustable, you're going to make it self-clean. Oh, warm the seat. Somebody else said that. Warm the seat. Are any of these things changes, he asked. And the answer was no. They just made it more comfortable. You see, to make real change, it takes courage because you have to get uncomfortable. That's when you change. That's the ripple effect that we need in our neighborhood. To change the world, we have to change ourselves. We have to love ourselves before we can love anyone else. So I'm going to allow you a minute or two, which we don't normally do here at the temple because we're so large. I'm going to make you uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable when I have to get up here on Sundays. So you just sit there and watch me. So now I get to watch you. I want you to be uncomfortable. Get up. This is going to take about 3 minutes. I'll tell you when it's time to sit back down. Stand up. Look around. Someone within your same proximity where you don't have to go to the other side of the room. Find that person you've never met before. You have no idea who they are. Go over there and say, neighbor, I love you. Neighbor, I love you. I know you. Hey, best friend. My arms are too short. Wow. Wow. Okay, let's find our seats. Please find your seat. Find your seat. Find your seat. Thank you for casting your stone across the water. Look at the ripple effect. Did you see how the energy in this room raised up? Did you see the consciousness raised? If we could measure this on a scale or see it, I can't imagine what it would look like. The vibration. When we love our neighbors, we increase our vibration. And the vibration of the whole neighborhood goes up. That's what this is about. With that in your consciousness, with that in your thoughts, take this with you this week. At the grocery store, you see somebody that you haven't, hey, how are you doing? My name is so-and-so. Nice to meet you. It'll scare some people. But that's okay. They'll still like it. We all want to be loved and accepted. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Let's take that into meditation.